I'm Angus Gillespie, your host for Old Ways in New Jersey. I'm here with Richard Skelly, host of Low Budget Blues program that runs from 8 to 10 p.m. on Thursdays on 88.7 on WRSU FM in New Brunswick. The roots of blues music was established in African American history and is known for having its own musical form. The use of adapted blues scales, call and response patterns, and 12-bar blues chord progressions form a very important part of the genre's sound and playing style. Over the years, Richard has had many distinguished guests on his program. Richard has worked many years as both a newspaper reporter and as a contract journalist, contributing to many publications, including Living Blues. So it's my pleasure to welcome Richard Skelly to our studio here in East Brunswick. How did you come to admire blues music in the first place?
I would have to say it was this film that I saw over at the old Movie City 5 off Route 18. We went to see The Last Waltz, and in those days when movies came out, it wasn't a flood of movies every Friday, so we went back to see The Last Waltz another 2 or 3 times over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I just saw Muddy Waters, and I saw Paul Butterfield, and I saw the band, and I wanted to see Bob Dylan. That's why I went to see the film. And, I just thought, Bob Dylan was great, and Dr. John was great, but Muddy Waters stole the show. And even Dr. John later said that to me, when I met him many years later. He said, all the guitar players in the audience, Eric Clapton, everybody standing there, they all had their jaws hanging open while they were watching Muddy Waters. So Muddy Waters was really a turning point. I was maybe 13 at the time.
Wow. What are some common misconceptions about the blues?
The most common one that still bugs me is that, people assume that it's sad, crying in your beer music, and it's really not. The great poet Allen Ginsberg pointed out it was the joys of life as well as the sorrows involved in life as well,
So it's the ups and downs.
Yes.
Yeah. And when did you begin hosting your radio show at Rutgers?
Christmas Eve, 1981. Jeff Spitz, who was a very good guy who went to East Brunswick High School and who was a teacher in Highland Park High School, he and Judica Ellis, they both used to co-host the show together. And I would go over there on Thursday nights just to help out, to be a coffee errand guy, and go grab albums from the library for them while they were on the air, And I was just hanging out there for a number of months. And Jeff said, Richard, why don't we, start, getting you trained so that you can host the show yourself? Because there's a lot to know, how to cue up old vinyl albums on the turntables, how to take the transmitter readings, how to answer the phone while you're queuing up an old vinyl album on the turntable, how to, answer the phone when 4 or 5 lines are lit, So Jeff and Judica did a great job training me. And then it was Christmas Eve, 1981, but I was off and running,
I suppose answering the phone encourages your listeners to feel like they're involved, they're participating.
Of course, it's community affairs radio,
Who are some of the musicians you've had on the air over the years?
Oh, God, so many that have been so nice to come to the WRSU studios at the Rutgers Student Center on College Avenue. So many. Joe Louis Walker, the poet Allen Ginsberg came over from New York to play old sacks of vinyl that he was carrying. And my poet friend from New Brunswick said, Richard, next time you have Allen on the show, don't let him take the train from you. I didn't know he carried 2 big sacks of vinyl and played all his favorite acoustic blues. But Joe Louis Walker, Allen Ginsberg, Johnny Clyde Copeland many times, Shamika Copeland, his daughter, made her debut on my radio show as a 16-year-old, and now she is basically, the hottest thing in blues among women blues singers. She's she's finding whole new audiences. She just was opening for Jason Isbell on her last tour. She's doing very well and she's an international act. But Shamika Copeland, Johnny Clyde Copeland, Guy Davis, many, many times now, because Guy's right in New York. Who else now? I'm trying to think about Texas people. Doyle Bramhall Sr., who wrote all of these great songs with Stevie Ray Vaughan, which sort of created a blues boom in the late 1980s, because Stevie Ray Vaughan was suddenly a blues rock artist who was being played on commercial radio on stations like the old WNEW FM in New York. And suddenly people were paying attention to blues again.
Changing the focus for a moment, what's the relationship between blues and jazz?
I always liked the definition that Wynton Marsalis offers. Wynton Marsalis and his father, Ellis Marsalis, who just passed away a few years ago. But Ellis was great. And Wynton always says, and still says, you want to learn to play jazz, learn the blues. So that if you know the blues and you know how to improvise around the blues scales, you'll be a proper jazz player. And I still believe that is, absolutely the truth. There's a lot of younger jazz players not coming out of Rutgers, because Rutgers has a very good jazz program, but coming out of other schools who, just don't know how to play the blues or know much about the blues. And it's so inherent, it's basic. You want to play good jazz, you've got to play good blues first.
Yeah, so it's fair to say that jazz was born out of the blues.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. Have you always been on the show on WRSU on Thursday nights? Is that?
No, actually, initially it was Monday nights for the longest time, and then Monday nights for the longest time. Well, and then really for a longer period of time now, since like the late 1980s, we've been on Thursday nights.
Yeah.
Shakur, with related music, usually right within our time slot. So we're 8 to 10, but for years, Bill Swank hosted the Big Beat Show from 7 to 8, which was urban group harmony, doo-wop music, what they would call doo-wop music. So there's a related genre, and that would be on from 7 to 8, and then I'd be on from 8 to 10. So,
do you often get preempted by sports events at Rutgers?
Yes, but it doesn't really pick up steam until mid-December or late December and January and February, when there are some night basketball games involved for the men and the women,
So it's basketball that's the big conflict.
Well, I don't know. The Rutgers men's team this past year did very well. So on the one hand, that's good. On the other hand, I enjoy, on the same hand, I enjoy taking a little break from the radio show in January and February. Yeah. And sometimes into March, because winters can get nasty.
Yeah. And
then on the other hand, it does kind of drag on when there's preemptions going on into April,
Is there any place around the East Brunswick area where I can go to see live blues around here?
No, you would have to, unless you consider Asbury Park or Belmar the East Brunswick area, you would have to go down there now. It's sad. We used to have a great blues club in New Brunswick, the Old Bay restaurant.
That's right.
And we used to have the Mine Street Coffee House.
Yeah, that's right.
The acoustic blues. And now neither of those venues are around anymore. And we used to have Roxy and Duke's Roadhouse in Dunellen, and that folded kind of during the pandemic, even though the owner there was very savvy. I would say the Stanhope House would be a reasonably close venue, but you have to go up 287 to Route 206 and into Stanhope. That's a great place for blues and roots music. The owner there, John Klein, a very savvy guy, and he's doing the right things to keep the club alive. It's a historic mansion, keep it alive post-pandemic here,
What about blues festivals? Are there any nearby?
Yes, but again, they're fewer than they used to be. You can go to, actually coming up in July, will be Mikey Jr.'s gathering in Morrisville, Pennsylvania in mid-July, and he has booked, a nice array of talent from as far away as Tennessee and Florida to come play at his festival. It's at the Snipes Farm in Morrisville, PA, just literally minutes over the bridge from Trenton. If you're going over down Route 1 over the Morrisville Bridge into Pennsylvania. His festival's mid-July. We normally have the Crawfish Festival every June. This year in Sussex County at Sussex County Fairgrounds. This year, Michael Arnone, who runs that, is taking a break from that because he's still regrouping from the pandemic, and he's running a cruise out of New Orleans in November, New Orleans and Blues Cruise.
Wow. In general, how would you assess the current status of blues music in the U.S.?
I'd say it's extremely healthy. Everyone has some sort of blues society if they're in any kind of a decent-sized city. I would say it's very, very healthy, and it's one of these cliches that exists in the blues about, we got to be keeping the blues alive, but really, the blues is alive and well. It may have changed in terms of the racial makeup of who's playing blues, but, it's very much alive and well and thriving in many ways. It's just a matter of being able to put together more, there are a lot of festivals now. It's just you've got to be able to, meet your production costs and meet your vendor costs and everything else. And you know about this from the New Jersey Folk Festival, but
it's a business.
Yeah, it's a business.
Yeah.
And it can be difficult when you're paying booking agents. Sometimes you're overpaying for an artist or whatever. But I'd say the blues are very much alive and well. It's easy to find good blues clubs in eastern Pennsylvania, in Bucks County. There's several there,
So you would go along with the saying, the blues will never die.
Correct.
Yeah.
I would. Absolutely. Yeah.
And what do you say to people? I've heard this with regard to the New Jersey Folk Festival. Oh, the blues! Every song sounds alike to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good one. Those are the people that haven't opened their minds up enough to listen carefully.
Yeah.
A lot of people will say that about traditional jazz, they just haven't, everything sounds the same. You've got to open your mind up and listen for the subtleties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the historical background of the blues. In what part of the U.S. did it originate, and what's the background? Well,
my understanding of the background is it's agricultural base. It's field hollers from the Mississippi Delta, and then
from slavery days.
Yes, yeah. From slavery days, and from indentured servant days after that, and then I'm thinking about Congo Square in New Orleans, which was a historic, still is a historic place to visit, and that, Sonny Landreth wrote a song about as, being the birthplace of the blues, Congo Square,
I remember from history that Congo Square, it was set aside on Sundays because the slave owners realized they couldn't work these people 7 days a week. It just wouldn't work.
Right.
So they let them have Sunday off, and they would gather at the Congo Square, and it was natural that they would turn to music for their day off.
Yes, drumming. Yes, drumming. Absolutely.
Does a musician have to be raised in rural poverty in order to be an accredited blues player?
No.
It's changed, right?
Oh, it's changed dramatically. In fact.
And there's more white people now playing the blues.
Absolutely. Yeah. And B.B. King had a press conference at the Blue Note in New York back maybe in 1995 that I went to, 94, 95, 96. So in the mid-90s, he had a press conference, and basically he said, thank God for all these white guys driving around in vans all over the country, because they're keeping our blues music healthy, and they're taking it in new directions.
That's nice of him to say. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
What do you think about the 1980 movie Blues Brothers?
I don't know. I think it was a good shot in the arm for people for people that are in it. It was a good shot in the arm for the musicians who were struggling at the time.
Yeah.
But as far as the actual Blues Brothers album that came out, I remember that it all grew out of Saturday Night Live, which was an enjoyable enough show in the 70s and early 80s. But Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, they both deserve some credit for helping to spread awareness about the simple yet complex beauty of the blues,
And in your opinion, what's the difference between country blues and urban blues?
Country blues, acoustic, and sometimes acoustic electric, and urban blues, more electric and amplified. And then there's a whole bit of history about how when a lot of the former agricultural workers like Muddy Waters from Mississippi came up to Chicago and they moved north, they had problems being heard in blues clubs that serve food over the noise of the silverware and everything else. So electric blues evolved, amplified blues evolved in those clubs.
Yeah, I recently was visiting Nashville, Tennessee, and I went to some blues clubs.
Yeah,
even though country music is the dominant force.
It's a great music city.
Yeah.
Nashville is terrific,
and it's like Broadway. It's so crowded with pedestrians, and the bars are very popular.
Right.
But I have this bias. I prefer when the amplification is not turned all the way up. I mean, sometimes it can be deafening almost. But at the same time, I understand they're compensating for the fact that the people in the bar are talking and clattering with their silverware. I like something kind of mellow.
Yeah. Well, in the 1950s and 60s in Chicago blues clubs, I'm sure, and elsewhere, that was the standard procedure. It's only recently in like the 90s that they've been actually loud enough sound systems where you can hear it out 30 yards away on the sidewalk.
Yeah. What I noticed in Nashville, I mean, I'm generalizing, but the old-timey music, which was softer and gentler, was generally in the daytime for old folks.
Right. And
this amplified stuff was in the evening for young folks.
Yeah. Well, they may regret it when they get older that they were listening to so much loud music.
Yeah.
And they find they have, greatly diminished hearing. Yeah.
I don't know quite how to say this, but have you found that there are often gender stereotypes in blues music?
Yes, in the in the main, but there's a lot of good women blues singers that are out there now.
Correcting this.
That are correcting this. There was a great 90s group, 80s and 90s group called the Sapphire, the Uppity Blues Women, and they were all from the part of Virginia that you're from. And they had Gay, Deg Balola, and they had Ann Rabson, who passed away sadly, and then they had two other members, but Sapphire, the Uppity Blues Women, were out there reviving classic blues from like people like Memphis Minnie and Bessie Smith and Mamie Smith, and just recycling a lot of their tunes with a more modern instrumentation,
I know in my own courses at Rutgers on traditional music, I prominently feature Robert Johnson.
Good.
And I wish you could speak briefly. Why is he so important?
He's important because he never had a chance to play at John Hammond's Spiritual Swing show at Carnegie Hall in 1938. He was murdered prior to that, whether by poisoning or stabbing. They suspect now, actually John Hammond said that. They strongly suspect now it was poisoning. And it's become, bigger in death than he ever was in life, Yeah. But as far as the basics of acoustic blues, he's not a bad place to start if you want to learn basic guitar.
I guess the story was he was at this bar and he was flirting with a woman who unfortunately was the owner's wife, and the owner took offense and served him this poison drink. Yeah. Sad story.
There's a number of different stories going around about it, but
we may never know the truth. Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough, a guy from New Brunswick, Skip Henderson, was down. I think he's still down there, and he located what he strongly suspects is Robert Johnson's unmarked grave.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things he was able to do was mark it.
And following up on Robert Johnson, tell us a little bit about the significance of the crossroads in the blues.
It's become a big tourist destination for anybody that's going to Clarksdale now. It was allegedly there that Robert Johnson, the myth goes that he sold his soul to the devil in order to suddenly be able to play great guitar. But I don't really buy any of that. I just believe he just worked his butt off and became a great guitarist on his own,
Yeah. They do say that he was kind of secretive about his style. If he saw someone watching him closely, he would turn his back on them as he was playing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Miles Davis did that a lot, in concerts.
Yeah.
He turned his back on the audience, right? Yeah.
Tell us a little bit what is meant by Chicago blues.
Well, really, there is. I don't think of it as I think of it now as there are regional styles. So there are some differences. You have Chicago blues, you have Texas Roadhouse blues, which is Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, and then you have San Francisco Bay Area blues, and then you have even New York City and Boston blues. So they all have their regional attributes. So Chicago blues typically tends to be songs that celebrate Chicago, perhaps.
And where is blues music headed at the present time?
I think it's in for a very healthy future, because whenever there's too much crap on the radio, like on commercial radio, which is the case right now, the blues always rises to the top. There's too much of the same meaningless crap being played again and again on certain radio stations, that use focus groups and all of that, and they narrowcast and narrow their format down. So, I mean, alternative radio is a terrific thing, and cable radio, Sirius XM, has also been good, I think, for a lot of blues and jazz and folk musicians, really.
And following up on my earlier question, tell us a little bit about the Memphis blues.
Memphis blues are really not all that different from Chicago blues, but perhaps more of Mississippi Delta influence involved because Memphis is so close to the Mississippi Delta. You leave Memphis and you can be in the Delta, 45 minutes later, by car,
I know I visited Bill Ferris at the University of Mississippi.
Yes, nice guy. Yeah.
And he has this regular routine where he takes visitors from the north like myself, and he said, let me take you out to dinner. And we go on this paved road and turn off on a dirt road. We come across a general store, and there's some tables in the back, and they're serving a fried catfish. And I think he has this all down pat to show off the culture of Mississippi.
Absolutely. When you go to Clarksdale now, you can go to the actor Morgan Freeman. You can go to his Ground Zero Blues Club, which he owns with a lawyer. I believe it's still doing well financially. And there's droves of tourists who come to Clarksdale, and they can go to Morgan Freeman's Blues Club, but they can also go to these other smaller places on side streets where they're grilling chicken and barbecue out front and serving beer, and you can go inside and listen to some music or stay out on a porch or whatever. So I mean, these places exist in and around Clarksdale and the Hill Country.
And Richard, I know that you have not only had this radio show about the blues, but you've written about the blues.
Well, for a lot of years, yeah, sure.
So just a quick question is, which is more difficult, writing an article or hosting a show?
Writing an article, I would say. You really got to make your feature story have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and with the radio show, I just go in with an idea. If I want to play this, and these 4 tracks first before I jump into anything else, and the rest of it is very much improvised and off the cuff.
You make it up as you go along.
Yeah. And it's always great to hear from listeners because they are the reason we do what we do, in college radio, and community radio, really. Yeah.
So, Richard, I want to thank you for appearing here on East Brunswick Television and sharing all your wealth of knowledge about the blues.
Well, thanks
for coming.
All right. Thank you very much. You all. Right.